Now, I am still digesting Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report. It's pretty voluminous, and you have to go over it a couple of times to get all of the elements of it. But to me, there are two things that are now crystal clear. First, the Russian government carried out a sweeping and systematic attack on the 2016 election, and the Trump campaign actively welcomed it. Second, the president repeatedly tried to undermine and obstruct the special counsel's investigation into that interference. As we speak, an important debate is taking place about how to hold the president accountable. But no matter what path the House of Representatives pursues, the Mueller report has left many questions unanswered about whether there are ongoing counterintelligence investigations, about investigations referred by the special counsel to other jurisdictions, and about what explains for President Trump's disturbing deference to Vladimir Putin. I want answers to these questions as much as anyone else. But even as we pursue the truth, we cannot ignore the urgent need to shore up the security of our election systems. Nothing is more sacred to our democracy than the right to vote. It is a right that Americans have fought for, have marched for, have died for throughout our history, and we must protect our democratic process. The special counsel's report details how Russian intelligence officers targeted our election repeatedly and its infrastructure in 2016. Here's what we know. Russian hackers conducted cyber surveillance of at least 20 state election systems, and the Kremlin intended to use this information to cast doubt on the legitimacy of a Clinton victory. They targeted employees of a voting technology company and successfully installed malware on their computer networks. In a handful of states, they gained the capacity to actually manipulate and even delete voter registration data. And to top it off, Russian hackers successfully infiltrated the networks of at least one county government in Florida. Let's remember why President Putin directed these attacks in the first place. He wants to disrupt American democracy and democracies around the world and watch them crumble from within. Putin understands that for our democracy to work, the American people must have faith and trust that our elections are free, fair, and secure. If you chip away at that faith, you chip away at democracy itself. We must treat the Mueller report like a preview of what's to come. Russian-linked actors will target our election infrastructure in 2020, perhaps with even greater sophistication. With the election a year and a half away, we don't have the luxury of time, and New Jersey has a lot of work to do. A February 2018 report from the Center for American Progress gave us a D for election security. We're just one of 5 states nationwide wholly dependent on a paperless machine with no verifiable paper trail. That's why last year I helped to pass $380 million in funding to upgrade election infrastructure to the states of our country, more than $300 million above the Trump administration's requests. This bipartisan package also gave money to the Department of Homeland Security, with $26 million to help states secure their election systems through penetration testing, threat detection, and more. New Jersey is already putting a $10 million grant to good use, training election officials in cybersecurity, improving the accuracy of our voter registration system, and funding a pilot program for some counties to purchase or lease voting machines with a verifiable paper trail. But even if New Jersey spent all of its grant money upgrading voting machines, we'd still fall short. The Brennan Center for Justice estimates that it would cost New Jersey between $40 and $60 million to upgrade entirely to optical scan machines that produce a paper trail. Simply put, we have a long way to go. That's why, in light of the special counsel's findings, when I return to Washington today, I will immediately reintroduce my Protecting the Right to Independent and Democratic Elections Voting Act, or the Pride Voting Act of 2019. My legislation provides grants to states to implement or improve the use of audible paper trails, as well as conduct risk audits and implement the best in cybersecurity standards. During the Obama administration, the National Institute of Standards and Technology spent years working with private and public sector experts to develop a blueprint for preventing, detecting, and thwarting cybersecurity threats. The NIST cybersecurity framework is now known as the gold standard for managing cybersecurity risk, and my legislation will help states put it into action. Without action, we may be even more vulnerable in 2020 than we were in 2016. Think about it. Putin made a gamble when he attacked us in 2016, a gamble that would normally draw the ire of any American president, regardless of their political party. Yet there's been no such ire from President Trump. From day one, he has dismissed the threat of Russian interference as fake news and refused to hold Putin accountable. Just last week, we learned that Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney reportedly warned the Department of Homeland Security officials against discussing election security at the White House because President Trump still equates, and I quote, discussion of malign Russian activity with questions about the legitimacy of his victory. We cannot let the president's fragile ego paralyze federal efforts to protect our democracy. This isn't about Russia or President Trump, after all. We face evolving cyber threats from many foreign actors, from Iran to China to North Korea and beyond. And what benefits one party today could benefit another tomorrow. Since the release of the Mueller report, we've heard the president's inner circle downplay the extent of Russian interference in 2016 and the threat it poses in 2020. Last week, the president's son-in-law described Russia's efforts as, quote, just a few Facebook ads. Well, if you read the report, that couldn't be farther from the truth. According to the special counsel, Russian cyber actors had a budget of over $1 million to spend on their malign influence campaigns per month. And by Facebook's own admission, their ads could have reached up to 126 million users. Likewise, Rudy Giuliani recently suggested that there's nothing inherently wrong with accepting help from a hostile foreign power. I think that's pretty outrageous. The Trump team is essentially signaling that if the Kremlin sought to help in 2020, it would be just fine to accept it. So America's founders could have never conceived of cyber attacks on election infrastructure or the threat posed by an army of Twitter trolls. But the framers of our Constitution were deeply concerned about foreign influence in our electoral process. In the Federalist Papers, James Madison wrote that rival powers would work, and I quote, to have at the head of our government a man attached to their respective politics and interests. No pains, nor perhaps expense, will be spared. That was James Madison, one of the founders of the country, in the Federalist Papers, talking about the threat of foreign influence at the inception of our nation. Simply put, our framers saw that foreign influence in our democratic process was a threat to the sovereignty of our nation. It's time for Congress to do what President Trump will not: defend the security of our elections, defend our democracy, and therefore defend the sovereignty of this nation.